In this video, I just wanted to go through homeostasis, which actually, when I was looking, I'm not sure if I gave you this PowerPoint or not in school. I know we've spoken about homeostasis. It's chapter 29 in your textbook, but I'm unsure if you have this PowerPoint or not, so I'll put it on Edmodo as well. Now, our external environment varies considerably, so temperature is probably the most important factor. So the temperature outside during the winter, the summer, the different seasons, the temperature varies considerably. But our bodies have the ability to maintain a constant, or fairly constant anyway, internal environment. So that's what homeostasis is. That definition comes up an awful lot in the paper, so know that definition. So the ability of an organism to maintain relatively constant internal environment regardless of what's happening externally, regardless of what's happening in your environment outside the body. It involves many organs. It's all coordinated by the brain though. Now, do you remember when we were doing about the central nervous system, we talked about the structure of the brain, the hypothalamus, we said controls osmoregulation, or controls your temperature. Remember we had oats, so all the hypothalamus is the area of the brain that coordinates homeostasis, or makes sure, I suppose, that we have a fairly constant internal environment. Animal cells, you know this from the lymph system that you've just revised, but animal cells are bathed in tissue fluid or extracellular fluid, which provides an internal environment for them. So cells are surrounded by this liquid, this fluid, okay? Now, individual cells wouldn't withstand huge variations in temperature or pH or glucose concentration. So the job of the hypothalamus, if you like, is to maintain an internal environment. So the tissue fluid that surrounds the cells stays fairly constant. Okay, now this often requires organisms to exchange materials with its environment. So gaseous exchange, and that would be important in this chapter. So therefore the skin has a big role here as well. The lungs, the kidneys are all involved in this homeostasis chapter. So that's why, because we have already studied the skin, the lungs and the kidneys, we would have already spoken a good bit about homeostasis. But as I said, I don't know, did I actually give you this PowerPoint? No. This is tissue fluid. So do you remember again when we were doing the lymph, we said that as the blood flows in through the arteriole, remember the capillaries are very, very narrow. They're tiny little blood vessels. So as the blood goes from the arterioles into the capillaries, some of the liquid, the plasma part of your blood, is squeezed out or pushed out. And that plasma is rich in glucose, is rich in oxygen. And then what happens is that the glucose and the oxygen diffuse from the tissue fluid into the cells. So remember, each individual cell has to be fed. That's why the capillaries have to be so tiny. So they'll move in around the cells, supplying glucose and supplying oxygen. And remember, the process there, the way that the substances are moved, is diffusion. And then remember we said that 90% of this tissue fluid goes back in to the veins, or to the capillaries, on the venous side, on the venule side, and 10% of the tissue fluid drains into your lymph. If you had tissue fluid building up in particular muscles, your muscles would swell up. So you have a continuous regeneration, if you like, of tissue fluid around the cells, and you're draining that as well continuously so that it doesn't build up and doesn't cause edema, which is the swelling. Okay, now homeostasis allows the three main functions, I suppose, and we'll be talking about these individually in a minute, but homeostasis allows for organisms to maintain normal metabolic activity. Okay, so like if your internal temperature increased or decreased dramatically, then remember about optimum temperature for enzymes. Our enzymes that control every single metabolic reaction in your body wouldn't be able to function properly. So it's vital that we keep our temperature and our pH fairly constant, because otherwise we would denature enzymes, and we need those enzymes to be working at their maximum rate, if you like, in order to maintain normal metabolic activity. We also need homeostasis so that organs can function independently of their external conditions. So like frogs, for instance, cannot maintain their own body temperature. So during the winter, frogs have to hibernate because they just get too cold. Okay. Slight changes in internal conditions are when necessary. Now, you can't regulate it to the extreme. Like, we can tolerate small changes in temperature, say. So like, for instance, when we sleep, our body temperature normally drops by about a degree, do you know? We can get a little bit, you know, when you're sick and you might have a fever, our body can, and our enzymes can tolerate a couple of degrees, not more than 40. 40 is dangerous enough if your body temperature goes above 40 in terms of the enzymes functioning. So we can tolerate slight changes. Homeostasis allows us to tolerate slight changes in our internal conditions, but not huge changes. So examples of those kind of variables would be like temperature, pH, concentration of oxygen, blood glucose concentration, and you don't want toxic chemicals building up in your cells. Okay. Now, the temperature one is the first variable that we're going to talk about here. Now, again, very, very frequently in the exam papers, you'll see they'll ask you to define an endotherm or an ectotherm. Sometimes people find it hard to kind of remember which is which. So maybe, I don't know, would endotherm help you inside? Endotherms, look, are animals who can maintain their own temperature from heat that they make or generate by their own internal metabolism. That should be metabolism there. So in for endo, they can maintain their own internal environment, okay? Now, if the temperature outside drops for us, okay, what we can do is we can increase our rate of metabolism to generate more heat. If the temperature increases outside, we can lower our metabolic rate. So rate of metabolism can help us. It's one thing that helps us to regulate temperature. Okay, the skin plays a really important role in regulating body temperature as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the big thing is that we can change our rate of metabolism. If we need heat to be made, we can increase our metabolic rate, and if we don't need, if it's too hot outside, we can decrease our metabolic rate. Children, for instance, their body temperatures are nearly always warmer than adults because they have a higher metabolic rate. Children generally have a higher metabolic rate, so they would have a higher temperature. Okay, so try to remember endotherms. Inside. We can regulate, we are endotherms, we can regulate our own temperature from heat that we produce during metabolic reactions, okay? Whereas an ectotherm relies on the external source of heat, so the sun. So like snakes, say, for instance, are ectotherms. So if snakes get too hot, they have to crawl under the rock, or they have to go into shade or something. If snakes are cold, they go out into the sun. They can't control their internal temperature themselves. So they're totally dependent on external sources of heat, okay? Ectotherms, then the definition is, ectotherms are animals whose body temperature varies with the environmental temperature, okay? So for instance, and again, you might see graphs like this on exam papers. You can see the snake there, look, as the external temperature on the x-axis, see ambient temperature. So as the external temperature increases, the snake's temperature increases. But look at the cat. The temperature is staying fairly constant. That's because the cat can maintain its own internal body temperature through homeostasis, and it's not reliant on external temperatures. Okay, it can maintain its own internal temperature. Now, this slide, I don't know, I was thinking about even taking it out, it's a little bit confusing, but you can see anyway, the brain there on the top left and the bottom right hand corner is telling you that the brain is going to control your body temperature, the hypothalamus of your brain, okay? So like, do you see the red arrows are when you're hot? So like normal body temperature, 37 degrees there in the middle thermometer, okay? If you go above 37.8, it's telling you there, 37 degrees, then what kind of systems do we have that kick into place to bring back down our temperature again? So it's the hypothalamus. You must remember hypothalamus, oats. Hypothalamus will maintain our body temperature. So what sort of things do we do? Well, you can see there, look at the blood vessels. The blood vessels are dilating. We're too hot. So the blood vessels get wider. More blood is flowing through those vessels. So we will lose heat through the vessels. So, when you are hot, you look red, don't you? Your skin looks red because the blood vessels just under your skin dilate. More blood is flowing and more heat can be lost through the skin. The sweat glands, look, you can see the sweat glands there producing sweat, and remember the liquid sweat has to evaporate to gaseous form of sweat, so that where it gets the heat to do that, to change liquid sweat to gaseous sweat, is from your cells, so that cools you down as a result. hairs, not showing it there, but the hairs go flat on our skin, don't they? So we're not trapping a layer of air, and air is an insulator. And then as a result, the body temperature drops back to normal. If you're cold, then the blue arrows are kind of showing you what happens if you're cold. Again, it's the hypothalamus that regulates all of this. Vasoconstriction, so the blood vessels constrict, making them narrower, less blood flowing just under your skin, and therefore you'll have less heat loss. Okay, the muscles, the erector muscles contract and the hairs rise up on your skin, so it traps a layer of air, and air, remember, is an insulator, and you stop sweating. And that will bring your temperature back up again, okay? So we did the skin in school, so we would have gone through the structure of the skin. Remember, you need to be able to label it, and you need to be able to write a note on the contribution or the role, I suppose, that the skin plays in controlling our internal body temperature, because we're endotherms. Inside, we can control our own body temperature, irrelevant, or it doesn't matter what the external temperature is. The skin plays a really important role in allowing us to keep an internal temperature. And the other thing, of course, is metabolic rate. We can increase our metabolic rate and generate heat. If we decrease our metabolic rate, we can stop the production of heat. The hypothalamus, look, you need to remember that. Oats, remember? So osmoregulation, appetite, temperature, and sleep. When body temperature falls below, we've gone through what happens there, okay? And you can read through that there yourselves, but we've gone through that already when we were doing the skin. Our body temperature, now do you remember in this slide here I was saying to you that, look, homeostasis allows us to tolerate slight changes in our internal environment. So look, when we sleep, for instance, our body temperature drops. As we exercise, or if you're sick, if you have an infection, or if your body temperature could increase. Remember that the source of heat for ectotherms is metabolic reactions like us. We can change our metabolic rate and increase or stop production of heat as well by decreasing our metabolic rate. Okay, but ectotherms as well, the source of heat for ectotherms, sorry, that's wrong. That should be endotherms. I'm going to change that before I post this PowerPoint on Edmodo. But the source of heat for endotherms, that should be endotherms, is metabolic reactions. I'll change that. Now, cells exchange materials with their environment by diffusion. Okay, so we talked earlier, remember, about the blood plasma coming out through the capillaries into the making, I suppose, extracellular fluid, and that the glucose and the oxygen can diffusion into the cells, and then carbon dioxide and water vapor would diffuse across into the cells from the extracellular fluid. So diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, very important. Okay, special organs of exchange are not needed in smaller organisms, so like amoeba, say, for instance, because diffusion is adequate there. But we do need organs like our lungs and excretory organs to exchange materials when you're more complicated, I suppose. The breathing is controlled by the medulla oblongata, so watch that now, the breathing rate. Medulla oblongata will monitor levels of carbon dioxide, and you know that carbon dioxide is an acidic gas. So if you're producing more carbon dioxide, or there's more carbon dioxide in your bloodstream, this dissolves in the plasma of your blood and becomes carbonic acid. So the blood pH drops as you're making carbonic acid. Medulla oblongata monitors or detects this drop in blood pH, sends an impulse or an electrical impulse to the diaphragm and your intercostal muscles, causing them to contract more. And then you have a faster rate of breathing until you bring your levels of carbon dioxide back to normal. So the breathing and the kidney as well is really important in osmoregulation. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, homeostasis is also involved in keeping your blood glucose levels normal. So you know that if your blood glucose levels are high, your pancreas produces insulin, and that brings the blood glucose back to normal. Don't overly worry about it. Just know that it's insulin that maintains our blood glucose levels normal. And you have a glucometer there. If you were diabetic, you might use instruments like that to measure your blood glucose levels. And if you're diabetic, means that your pancreas can't produce insulin, and you need to inject in insulin to do the job, to keep the blood glucose levels normal or regular, constant in your body. Kidneys then, the kidney chapter we talked about osmoregulation when we were doing excretion with the kidneys. Kidneys will maintain water balance. Kidneys maintain a salt balance. Kidneys help you to excrete toxins, and they help you to keep your blood pH constant by getting rid of protons or H plus ions. Remember, H plus ions That's what pH is. The more H plus ions you have, then the lower the pH, the more acidic the blood is. So it tries to get rid of excess protons or H plus ions to keep your blood pH at 7.4, which is normal blood pH. Okay, right. So just to correct that again, now I'm going to change that before I post it on Edmodo. That should read there, in case there's anyone confused. That should read